Good evening. Ikwanasilam Nala Tanakweo. It's nice to see you all today. It's with great respect and humility that we acknowledge and honor the lands of the Snuneymuxw people. The Snuneymuxw people maintain their profound, unique, and spiritual connection to the land through ageless traditions, teachings, stewardship, and expressions of reciprocity. Before we get on with our agenda this evening, I just want to welcome everybody back. It's nice to see you all. I hope you had a very relaxing, enjoyable summer, doing whatever it is you enjoy doing. Look forward to working with you all this school year. We have no items to transfer to open agenda this evening. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in order? And if you have any, please indicate so in the chat. Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Leanne, seconded by Chantal. Anyone opposed to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to adoption of the minutes, that the minutes from the regular board meeting sorry, I'm going to read that again, that the minutes from the regular Board of Education meeting held on June 28th, 2023 be adopted. Moved by Mark, seconded by Leanne. Any questions or discussion? Seeing none, I call the question. Is there anyone opposed to adoption of the minutes? Seeing no opposition, the motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to item 8, the section 72.3 report under 8.1. The motion suggested reads as follows, that the section 72.3 report from the closed Board of Education meeting on June 28th and the special closed Board of Education meeting on June 29th, 2023 be received. Moved by Mark. A seconder. Moved by Chantal. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to announcements and reminders, a few here. So schools reopen on September 5th. Looking forward to seeing everyone then. Education Committee meeting September the 6th. Then we have our Business Committee meeting on September the 13th, followed by our Board of Education meeting on September the 27th. Moving on in our agenda, we have no presentations or correspondence this evening, so I'll move on to section 12 under Senior Staff Reports, 12.1, the financial year end. And I'll turn that over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Greg, and good evening. I'm going to take a little bit of extra time this evening just to walk through the process a little bit more and what we're looking at this evening and what it'll look like over the next month. So the first item to be presented this evening, and we typically have this meeting in August specifically for this purpose, is to bring the board the results of the year-end financials. And so if you'll recall, June 30 is the last day of the previous fiscal year. Everything stops, and then we start to proceed to see our financial position and get our audit ready. So that will come to the board in closed, and then I believe in open at the end of the month for the board to pass the financial statements. And so everything on here that we're going to be talking about this evening is preliminary in nature, because until the board passes it, it's not finalized. So what we're looking at, and I'll go through it, is the end of year financial position that we're in is generally a positive one. And so there's a couple of dynamics that I'll talk about, but first is that we continue to be in a positive position, and we ended the year in a surplus position, which we were expecting and we've talked about even during the budget process. The second piece, though, is that while the surplus grew just a little bit, it actually hasn't grown from an operating dollar perspective. And what I mean by that is that we were advanced a whole bunch of money for a specialized program, the integrated youth. Sorry, it's there, the ICY teams, where so it's not our K to 12 dollars surplus that has actually increased. So we've received funding last year for a service that will be provided this year. So the good news is that this board has managed to spend this year's dollar, last year's dollars on last year's kids without increasing its surplus. So that is, I believe, excellent news. So when what we do is we take the board's reserves policy and we apply that reserves policy to our surplus. And what we do is when we go on to page, it is page 5, what we'll see is it's called note 13. So it'll be note 13 in our financial statements. So it's our accumulated surplus. So you'll see, and Karen, maybe while I'm just giving an overview, you could bring up that page if possible. You'll see we ended the 2021-22 school year in a surplus position of $7.8 million. And then we outline where all of those various funds are associated with. This year, as noted, we've ended up higher at 8.5 million, but again, that increase is solely related to the new ICY team funding that was received last year. So what we have outlined is what we're proposing, staff is proposing for the expenditure, or at least where those various dollars are going to be or should be allocated to. So the first one is area what we call anticipated unusual expenses. So this is where we say we know that these dollars may have to flow. We don't know exactly how much that would be, but we can anticipate that expenditure would occur. And if you just scroll in just a little bit. So you'll see staffing contingency of 250,000, replacement cost contingency of 250,000. So last year we had a staffing contingency of 600,000. And so what the staffing contingency is for, we have a couple of these. We have one built into our operating budget. And so what'll happen is Jackie Poulin or Don Balcombe will realize that there's needs at a secondary elementary level that we need to put some of that contingency forward, and that determination is made. That's still there. This is for particularly the staffing is when we do the classroom enhancement fund. So this is the money that we receive from the government to fund the return of the 1991 collective agreement language for class size and class composition. So we need to prove every single one of those divisions that we're asking for. And if we can't, the government will make us pay our own dollars for that purpose. So an example is on September the 28th, we've got a class, say with 3 students with diverse needs, and we end up creating another class to try to meet the requirements of the collective agreement. And then all of a sudden, that student moves away the next day, and on October 1st, they're no longer there. Well, the board can't really yank the class, but now we don't have the background or the backup to support that, the ask in the classroom enhancement fund. That doesn't happen too often, but certainly if that happens multiple times in a year, the board is on the hook for those dollars and we don't have them budgeted. So that's the staffing contingency. We've lowered it, or we're proposing lowering it this year, though, because we really have very good processes in place, and I want to just really thank Tanya and Jackie Poulin, and particularly at the elementary level, for their eyes on that. So we haven't had to dip into that in a number of years, and so if we haven't used it, then we can't really anticipate the need to use it. And so we thought it would be appropriate to lower that amount, still keeping some there. Hopefully we don't have to use it, but it's there if we need to. The second one is replacement cost contingencies. And so last year's 400,000, and that was new last year with the idea that the Employment Standards Act change might have heightened use of employee sick benefits, and it did. And in fact, last year we did go into the contingency to the tune of about 125,000. So we've reduced that number as well, but the reason we've maintained the 250 contingency is because by the end of last year, Human Resources had worked some magic and was really, we were seeing a situation where we did not have the same level of failure to fills that we'd been seeing in previous years. So of course that's great for kids, it's great for the system, it's not great for the budget. And so we had to go into that contingency. So if that trend of being able to fill all of our vacancies exists and the heightened level of absenteeism continues, that probably is a long-term expectation, we may need it again. And so that's that contingency there. So at the end of the year, hopefully we don't use them, but we definitely can anticipate that we would. The second area are largely areas that we can't access. So the district benefit plan premium balance. So we, fund our healthcare benefits, our dental benefits, massage, medical, etc., based off of a usage. And so in previous years, we'd actually built up a significant balance. I think it was over $5 million a number of years ago. And we thought that's too much. We need to focus this year's dollars on this year's kids. And so we dropped that balance significantly over the last couple of years. And working with our external provider, that 2.5 million was felt to be an appropriate number. So for instance, this year, if all of a sudden all these services come online and the Canadian health system works out a bit better than it's been working out, then usage may well go up and we might end up having to dip into those funds. So it's kind of our safety valve, and we wouldn't want to go much below that, and certainly we try not to go above that as well. Revenue for the ICY team. So again, that's integrated community teams to work on mental health. I believe it is. I'm not the specialist on this area, but we received all of these funds in the previous fiscal. The planning occurred and they'll all be expended, or much of it will be expended in the coming year, hopefully. The teacher mentorship grant, that's money that's actually in the union's hands in our books, but for use of the union, I imagine it didn't get used very much because, we've got failure to fills. There is a lot of supports for release time, etc. And so it may be just difficult to use. I can't quite explain it, but it is on our books. And we don't really have the ability to say, take that money away and use it for a different purpose. Next one is Indigenous education programs. And so this is actually really good news. And so what we are obligated to do is keep on saying today's dollars for today's kids. And we've had a bit of a tough time expending all of our targeted dollars to support Indigenous students. And so that $415,000 surplus we saw last year is pretty much par for the course for 10 years. And last year, there was a real concerted effort to focus new resources and different resources to expend those dollars. That's been done. So the good news, of course, is that those services are flowing quicker. Of course, we are going to come up to a place where we don't have a surplus any longer, because I know we've increased some FTE, in particular in our secondaries. Again, money that the board's going to ask to write a letter to ask permission to use the $144,000. And it will be given, but the $144,000 is already spoken for. It just continues to be on the books. Bargaining. So last year with our CUPE partners, we bargained a number of items, and one of the items included additional EA hours. In order to do that, we needed to carry forward a little bit of the table money that we were given in for bargaining to this year. And again, that money is accounted for already. It just wasn't expended in the previous fiscal. Trustee professional development. Again, trustees were finding their feet and didn't have a lot of, I think, time outside of the district to find those professional development opportunities. And so those dollars were flowing through, and they're restricted for that purpose for next year. So we don't have a ton of restrictions like we might have in previous years. The next one is, again, a restricted surplus, but for multiple school years. And so one we've talked about many times is the idea that if we open Rutherford, and the board will be making that final decision here in October, and the numbers are looking promising at this time, is that we anticipate it's more of a movement of kids than additional kids to fund that school. And so the board is going to create itself frankly, a structural deficit by doing it. And so rather than having to cut in order to open the school, we put some money aside in year one to essentially build up a little bit of a pot of dollars so we can protect our operating fund. And then hopefully by the time it's open, the year after it's open, our enrollment will have increased to pay for that opening in full. Second one is school equipment. And so here's an area this year we are seeing enormous level of growth at our secondary schools. We have a small operating budget for equipment, desks, etc., but that money does not support the amount of growth. So ND gets a new classroom, Wellington needs a new classroom, etc. The schools just don't have the funds on hand. We don't have it in our operating budget, and we need to be able to support that equipment. School supplies, you'll see it's up a little bit from the year before. So this is the money that's left over in our schools at the end of the school year to support the purchase of supplies, of projects that they might be working on in multiple years. We have a cap of how much we'll let a school carry forward. This is relatively modest. Again, we encourage schools to spend what they can. We think this went up last year because of the Student and Affordability Fund was accessed so much. So that's a bit of an explanation there. It's also why we're not going to come to the board and say we're looking for an inflationary increase to school supply budgets, because they've gone up at the school level. Purchasing orders. So this is, I bought a computer in June. It didn't get delivered yet, so we still have the cash on hand. It's down significantly from last year, but that's the number there. And then active transportation is just a grant received last year to be used this current fiscal. So those are kind of more restricted ideas. So if you add those two, if you add the total of the, I guess you'd say restricted and unrestricted, we're going to end up with the total there of the 8573. Then what we're proposing. So ultimately, I think the important number to look at is the unrestricted balance. And so that's $3.171 million. That's the big important number. And I want to be clear that the board could come and say, hey, we don't want to set aside that money for Rutherford. We don't want to set aside that money for school equipment. The board is going to pass all of this. This is just, we think, the kind of needed ones. Then there's the 3.1 in unrestricted. And if you scroll to the very bottom of that chart, what we're proposing at this time is a transfer to local capital of $2.7 million. And then the remainder, $471,000, would go towards supporting inclusion as well as ELL supports. At this time, we don't have a specific proposal. So what's going to happen is the board's going to see all of these numbers again at the business committee 2 weeks from now, with specific outlines of where we anticipate the needs are. And then it'll finally pass all of it at the end of September, and then the money will flow. And so an example of, we've seen a significant increase in ELL need this over the summer, and in some of our elementary schools as well as our secondaries, but elementaries particularly, and we'll have more information on that, but that's where we're seeing a need. And of course, the complexity for supporting students with diverse needs is not going away, and particular elementary schools, again, I know a number of schools are struggling, and we're trying to allocate supports there. The reason for the transfer to local capital the way that it is, and I hope I was managed to say it enough times during our budget process, is we did not, as most school districts do, propose a transfer to local capital out of our operating fund in the budget time. Because if we had, because we have to transfer money to local capital, otherwise we can't replace computers, otherwise we can't do board goals that are in the local capital section, which we'll get to in a moment. Otherwise we can't finish the Wi-Fi program, which is over halfway done. And so rather than, again, create a deficit when we know that we're going to have a surplus at the end of the year. So rather than cut jobs, in order to do the local transfer that we know we need to do, what we said was, when the surplus comes, we know we need to make a local capital transfer. So that's why that's so large. So one of the things that we talked about as a team is this is the year to not be adding new things to our schools. So new priorities, new expectations. So you won't see, money to support a fancy new program. These are dollars that are going to flow to our schools, but then they're also going to support the local capital needs of the district. And Karen, could you turn to page 7? So this is our proposed local capital schedule for 3 years. And what the board is looking at here, and you'll see under each goal, the various funds that would be allocated to these projects. So a couple of the big ones are the equitable access to technology. So that's Wi-Fi access in our schools. And I believe Zayad was saying that we're done 24 of our facilities. And so we're well over halfway done. We do have some multi-million dollars left on the project. We're proposing a relatively small influx of 900,000, and the reason is because we have an increase in our annual facilities grant dollars this year, and we think it's appropriate that some of those dollars should flow to that project. Technology plan, so we have significant computer purchases to make. We will access some, and I think a great question was asked, will we access some of our Microsoft settlement money to support this? We certainly will. But again, putting an influx of dollars in to be able to support replacement of devices that we have. This is not the purchase of expansion of technology. That money is just replacement. Learning studios, this is our project of updating at Woodlands our dilapidated portables for use at other sites. And then you'll see a variety of the other ones. Vehicle replacement. Here's another example where we took it out of the operating budget to not create a deficit and said to the board, we need to electrify our fleet, but we also just need to replace, whether it's electric or not, replace over certain years our facilities vehicles. And so we need to do it through local capital transfer, not cause a deficit in the operating budget in spring if we know there's a surplus coming. Enrollment growth space, you'll see that 750. We need it. It costs an incredible amount of money to go through the process of moving a portable, and we're moving 5 this year. And so that's a significant expenditure that we just have to have. Otherwise, we can't move it. Turf field expense will be coming to the board soon for finalization and transfer to the city, and those funds are already spoken for. And then you'll see next year envision money being to support some capital updates to Rutherford prior to its opening in the event that that's finalized by the board. So it's important just to highlight how important that local capital transfer is and how it was planned that our surplus would largely look like this in the spring when we were doing our operating budget. So I'm not sure if I can call Associate Secretary Treasurer Sutton to jump on if she wants to add anything, or just to thank her for her work on this, and then happy to answer questions.
Thank you through the chair. I don't have anything to add, but happy to answer questions as Mark indicates.
Thank you, Mark and Tanya. Are there any questions? I don't see any questions. Thank you for your thoughtful work, and I especially liked the way that it was presented in relation to the board goals. So I appreciate seeing it organized in that way. It's helpful. One last call for comments or questions. Chantel.
Hi, it's weird. I can't actually put my hand up. I don't understand why I can't do that. So it would have made it a little bit easier to do that. I actually, it's just a comment through you, Chair, to the folks there that I have so far. I'm sure I've been kind of digesting this a little bit long over the last day, and so I might have some more questions in the future. But I really like to see the outdoor learning fund. I see that there's 261,000 in that, and that is really great for us to have in there for this next year for folks to be learning outside and to have that well funded. So I thank you for that. And I think that's pretty much it. So I'll have maybe some more questions at a later date, but thank you.
Thank you. And Dale had just reminded us, because this is a Teams live meeting, it doesn't provide us with the option of raising our hands. So please use the chat box and just indicate if you have a question or comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you, Dale.
I did.
And perhaps, if it's okay, Chair, just on the outdoor learning as an example, there's an example that the board, when we drew down the benefits balance, we did make some significant investments with those dollars into these areas. And those dollars are actually money that just hasn't been able to be expended because of people power issues. And so this year it's actually money left over from previous years, and there's actually no money in the future necessarily allocated to outdoor learning. We can certainly look at AFG, but that'll be something the board will have to consider if we're in a surplus position next year to kind of replenish that for the continued expansion.
Thank you, Mark. Anyone else? Okay, I don't see anybody else. So I'll thank you again for the update. And we'll move on to item 12.2, the policy committee work plan.
Great. And just one last comment on that one, if it's okay. Again, coming back to business committee, and so there will be lots of time for questions with respect to the recommendation on the expenditure of the surplus. It'll be more robust than current because we'll have more knowledge on the ground when schools actually open, and our school secretaries have done their magic at inputting all the kids into the system. So there will be more on that as well.
Great.
Okay, so this item, Chair, is coming in follow-up of a June update from the policy committee to the board about, what was accomplished. So largely all the financial policies got accomplished last year and have fallen off. And so what you see is policy work, proposed policy committee work plan for the year with a few additions. And we've added the report. Oh, sorry, we did not add the report from June, but it's available if need be. And so there's no deletions except for where they've been completed, and there's continuation of work and just notations on a couple of policies that it was determined that it would be perhaps better to have the board work on as a whole. The one other thing I'll point out is in the June report, there was a reference to a number of administrative procedures that may well require a policy to go with them. And they're not represented on here because that work is kind of in progress. So just a heads up that we may come back and say, oh, okay, well, this administrative procedure actually needs a policy in order to authorize the procedure in the first place. And so we're doing some of that work as well.
Great. Thank you, Mark. I'll go to Charlene. She has a question.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify, I have a motion that would add to, if it passes, the policy work plan. And so I'm wondering, would you like that before the main motion comes forward or after, or does it matter?
I would, oh, Chair.
I'll go to our parliamentarian for advice.
I would recommend that the main motion gets moved and then an amendment to add is done, and then the main motion will be voted upon at the end with the addition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is there any questions or discussion before we get into the motion? Okay, I don't see any. Is there somebody that is willing to move the motion? Go ahead, Tanya.
We've got a seconder. Good. I think that the plan overall is really good. I think that I've been really grateful and pleased with the work of our policy committee since we brought it into existence, and I think it's important we support the continued work.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. That motion's been seconded by Chantel. And sorry, I allowed you to motivate the motion before it was seconded. That's my bad. So I just need some clarification, Charlene. Are you hoping to amend the motion that's on the table now, or are you looking to add to it if it's adopted? Sorry, you're muted.
I can make an amendment to this motion that would meet my needs.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I'd like to move an amendment to add policy 2.4, role of the chair and vice chair, to the policy committee work plan. And that following the annual general meeting of the board, a subcommittee of the policy committee be struck, including the current chair and vice chair, as well as the newly elected chair and vice chair, to make recommendations for updates on policy 2.4 to the policy committee.
Thank you. To assist us, Charlene, is there any way that you could paste it into the chat before I ask for a seconder? If you need a minute, oh, you're quick. Look at that. All ready to go. So I'm just going to give everyone a chance that the motion's been, the amendment has been seconded by Leanne. So I'll go back to you, Charlene, to motivate your amendment.
Thank you. So this policy hasn't been updated since 2012. And on the last board, I worked with 2 different vice chairs, and collectively all 3 of us saw a need to update this policy, but it was one of those things that nobody ever really got around to doing because there's always so much work to do. One of the things that I found challenging when I first became the chair of the board in 2018 was that there's very little in the way of instruction. You sort of have to flounder and figure it out as you go. And so I had to rely on a really outdated policy to try to figure out how to do the job. I think that when we update policies like this, we actually help make the job easier in the future. Whoever is the chair, maybe on this board or vice chair on this board, and boards beyond us, because it's been a long time since it's been updated. And our values aren't necessarily exactly the same as they were in 2012. There's a lot of other viewpoints to be considered. And I think opening up a discussion on what the role of the chair and vice chair is and what it could look like is an important one to be had to make the job easier to do. And so I'd like to have an opportunity for yourself and myself to be able to share what we've learned and update that policy for future chairs and vice chairs. And maybe even open up a discussion on, whether it should be a co-chair position so that people who have full-time jobs are still able to participate in that type of governance with the board. It's hard to balance a lot of different things, and I think if we can have those discussions and figure out a way to make the positions more accessible to everybody, that benefits our board and future boards as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. So I've started a speakers list, and I have Mark and Tanya. So go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Greg. Through you to the mover of the motion. If that's appropriate, I'm just curious. I'm a big believer, if it ain't broke, don't fix. I'm wondering, 3 or 4 years of experience as chair, Shar, if there are some things that came up that need to be addressed that you feel that are, worthy for us to chew our teeth into. Thanks, Shar.
Okay, Greg. Yeah,
Yep.
thanks. You know what? I honestly think workload is a significant issue. I was the chair for 4 years. My workload was significant, upwards of 30 plus hours a week sometimes. When you're trying to chase emails and conversations and keep everybody on track and share all of the information, it's a lot and it's not easy. And that's as well as doing your regular trustee homework, reading all the agendas that are put together by staff and everything else. So if there's a way to more equally share the workload between a chair and a vice chair, or create it being a co-chair position possibly, I think that it will address workload issues. I think it has the potential to address the hierarchical issues that are contained in this policy. It's fairly colonial in a thou shalt type manner. I think there's better ways that we can do business, keeping in mind the CITSS framework. And I think that we need to open up that conversation and try to figure out how we can be more collaborative in our approach, because I think that's what this district values now, is collaborating together, and that less of a power imbalance, because sometimes it seems that way, but it really isn't that way. So I think we can make this policy work better for the people that are doing the work and help other people understand the role of their chair and vice chair too.
Thank you, Charlene. Mark, would you like a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Through you to, I guess, members of the policy committee, whether that's staff or members that are trustees. In terms of the next year going forward, do we have enough time? This is a pretty heavy topic. This is a big, and I'm not against, tackling this, because it's very worthy, and I think that the motion has super strong merit. I'm just wondering if we do have the time.
Yep, I can take a shot and then maybe give Mark a chance to. Just as serving on the policy committee, I can say that over the last couple of years, we've developed what I think is a very efficient process of working together to review our policies, and we've been able to be quite productive in our work on that committee. But you're right, we do have a heavy workload, and I guess what I would say is that, as a standing committee, I believe it's called, is that correct, Mark? Standing, I always get those terms mixed up, standing committee, whatever. As a committee, we're taking our direction from the board. So if it's the board's will to, review that policy, then that will become part of our work plan, and we'll do it as we can. Mark?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. I think the one other thing to say is that when I read the motion the way that it's written, the policy committee is not doing the work. The policy committee is doing the review of the subcommittee. So whoever would be on the subcommittee would be the ones that are tasked with the kind of initial work. It's similar to, I think, a couple of the other ones. So for instance, continuous improvement of instruction and assessment is being kind of led in the background right now by Learning Services, as an example, to come to policy committee for review, discussion, and go back to tweak, then come back and then go to the board. So not all of the work is always done by the policy committee. It's more of the structure to help everything flow and then come to the board for comments. So I'm not sure it adds a ton. To that committee, the subcommittee, I can't speak to.
Thanks, Mark. I'll move on to Tanya and then Tom.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. Yes, I completely support this motion. I think that it is absolutely a good thing for us to be doing, for all the reasons Charlene noted, but in particular because I think we have a real opportunity. I really like what the mover stated around the idea of a co-chair for particularly for the board chair and vice chair to work more closely together and have that co-chair type relationship, or actual formal co-chairs I think that that sets a good model for the district around collaboration and is in keeping with the values. And I think that it allows for more capacity building, and it allows for someone who might, and I'll use myself as an example, might be intimidated about certain aspects of being the board chair, but not others. If the board chair, if you have two co-chairs, it's much easier to have people share the workload in ways that works for their strengths.
Thank you, Tanya. Tom?
Yeah, through you, Chair. I'm looking for some instruction, I guess, from the Secretary Treasurer. You know, I'm trying to understand how this motion would affect the current work plan that the policy committee has. We were sent 3 new items for the work plan when this policy committee was formed at the beginning of our term. We have been working well. I think it's been an effective committee. Does this motion make this the work plan's top priority, or does it just get on the list of things that we consider in our work plan? I think a lot of us on the work plan committee, on the policy committee now, acknowledge that in our first year, we've been doing the work that's essentially been left over from previous work plans. So I'm just trying to get a sense, maybe through Mark, or where this motion would put this task on our list of priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Mark?
Through you, Chair. So I think that the committee would have a certain amount of leeway with respect to the issue, but again, as previously noted, the motion puts it on the work plan, but the initial work is actually being done by a subcommittee that would have specific representation as determined. Well, specific representation as in the chair and vice chair, and potentially the new chair and vice chair as well as whoever would be appointed by that group. So I think that they would come to the policy committee, probably not taking up too much of the space, but more of a here's what was determined. Policy committee can have say it and then have it flow to the board and then go back as needed. So all that to say is it's not prioritized above another thing, but I'm not sure that it places a huge burden on the policy committee, more on the subcommittee that would be created as a result.
Tom, would you like a follow-up?
Yeah, because that just, I have a question about the idea of the subcommittee. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but a subcommittee would be made up of people that are already on the policy committee? Or are they separate people altogether that are now members of the policy committee by that structure? How does that work?
So through you, Chair, so this will be the first time that a subcommittee of the policy committee has been struck. So I would foresee it to be somewhat similar to an ad hoc committee generally. And so, for instance, I believe Student Voice has an ad hoc committee, even though the policy itself is on our work plan. So I would think it would be something similar to that, where the chair has the ability to set the membership of that. But again, this would be the first technical time that I'm aware that a subcommittee of the policy committee is struck.
If I may add to that, I think we do have possibly some precedent with our long-range facilities plan Ladysmith subcommittee, tasked with Ladysmith related things. So I don't know if that's a parallel to look at, but seems somewhat similar to me. That answer your question, Tom?
Yeah, it did. Thank you, Mark. It was very informative. I just to add my own comment to the motion, I guess. I'm in favor of always looking at these positions. It reminds me of one of the initiatives that Mark Robinson suggested we look at around the very process we use at the beginning to start our terms off. I don't want to speak for Mark Robinson in this case, but I feel like there's some connection between the two.
Thank you, Tom.
And that's already on our policy committee list. That's already on our policy work plan.
Okay. Thank you. So Tanya wants to call the question. I'd just like to first speak in favor of the amendment. speaking from my limited experience as the chair, I feel that there would be value in doing so and having this conversation. I know that I've done my best to work closely with Shar, and she supported me as well very many times, so I appreciate that. And I think formalizing that these roles a little bit differently to align with our current values of the board is, in my mind, a good thing to consider. So I will support the amendment. Okay, so I will call the question on the amendment. Is there anybody opposed to the amendment? Seeing none, the amendment carries. So now we're going to go back. I'm just wondering how people feel. Do we want to see the entire motion as amended pasted into the chat before we take a vote? Does everybody know what we're voting on? Any questions before we get into this? See a couple people typing. Okay. Hearing looks like people are okay so far. Okay, so if somebody wants to move the motion, or actually, Mark, can you please clarify for me, do we need somebody to move the motion as amended?
Yeah,
No, the motion has been moved and now it's been amended, so.
Okay, so I'm going back to take a vote on the motion as amended. Thank you. All in favor of the motion as amended? And I should rephrase this because it's difficult to do in favor in chat. I'm going to ask this again. My apologies. Is there anybody opposed to the motion as amended? It's too difficult to track us as in favor, unfortunately, online. There's a couple people typing. I'm going to give them a sec. Okay. Let's give Tanya a minute. Thank you, Tanya. I don't see any opposition, so the motion passes. Thank you for bringing that forward, Charlene, and thanks everyone. Moving on in the agenda, we have no unfinished business, new business, and nothing for information this evening. For questions, just to confirm with Karen, I don't see any questions. Nope, no questions this evening. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Leanne, seconded by Charlene. Call the question. Anyone opposed to adjournment? Seeing none, motion carries. Thanks, everyone. Hope you appreciate the rest of your summer, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.